for training for the assistance of the other departments with apps engineering for RFQs when we get behind in our backlog. This is the portion where we'll go over the tools that were provided by service to the apps engineers to help us be able to quote labor. So there are two separate tools that I'm going to go over. One of them is a newer version. It very closely matches our older version. The newer version is less descriptive. I'll go over it first, and then the older version is much more descriptive in its wording, easier for people to learn as they're coming on. So I'll go over both of those tools, but I'll focus more on the second one as we go. So the first one I have on my screen is our installation tab. So these are the men, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit first so that we can see the whole thing, and then I'll zoom in certain areas. So row 4 is the number of men, and row 5 is the number of days that it takes those men to do the job that's described in rows 1 through 3. Of note, before we get started on going through all this, these are all installations, all tests, all anything to do with this is based on a 120 volt system of flooded jars. Now, some of these in the newer tab may call out a NiCad jar, or it may call out something that is a VRLA, but I believe on the new tool that most everything is based on flooded. And again, this is the newer tool for us, and I'll go through and make a correction on that statement if I need to. So I'm going to zoom in on the first part of this, and I'll kind of go over these kind of a few chunks at the time. So the first thing is if we have under 500 pounds, and it's either a 4-cell, and it's a 4-cell jar, so like our 4DX for Intersys, if you're familiar with those. If it's a 3-cell jar or a 2-cell jar, and they're less than 200 pounds, or if it's a 1-cell jar and less than 90 pounds. The reason there's a weird discrepancy there is because with fewer cells, you have more jars, and with more jars, you have more movement actions that are taken. So even though the jars weigh less, you have more movement because there are more jars. So there are less things we can do or more things we can do depending upon the number of cells. So anything that's under 500 pounds and 4-cell jar, no matter what the manufacturer is, 2 men, 1 day. So if you have an RFQ that comes in and says, hey, I have a 4DX string of 120 because they're based on 120 volts, then you would select on the quote tool, and I should have that pulled up here too. You would select on the quote tool under the industrial, because some people call them install technicians, to call them industrial technicians. They mean the same thing. You would go in your installation tab, and you would select the one that's 2 men, 1 day, which in this one is the level 1 person. 2 men, 1 day, 2 men, 1 day. The hours will automatically populate on the quote tool, but they will not be present on the service tool that they've given us to use and to go off of. Same thing, if it's this 3-cell jar, you still choose the same level of technician. And really, it's not a level of technician when you're looking at installs. With installs, you're looking more at the number of men and the number of hours it takes. So to my knowledge, all of these are the same level persons. It's just the change in the amount of personnel or hours that it takes to do a specific job. Now, with this being said, based on 120, based on 120, it's clear that if you have a 120 system, you can do in a day, you can do a 48 or a 24 or a 12 in a day. However, this is the part of the gray area. If I have a request for a 48 volt system and I don't hear anything from the sales rep about, hey, we have to be ultra competitive, we need to win this thing, we got to go as low as we can. If it's a 48 volt system, there are less total jars, less movement at your discretion if you're familiar enough with it, because in apps engineering, we've asked these questions to service before. We've asked to Brad before, can we do it in 8 hours instead of 10 because it's a 48 volt system? Well, the answer you're going to get is going to be yes, but we know that. And if you're uncomfortable with it, either ask me or ask Brad for specifically for installs. But this is the gray area, part of the gray area that we live in. So we still need the 2 hours for the installation report or the certification report, but we quote an 8-hour day because we're a day rate company. Another way to look at it, let's say you have 24 volts, we still need to do 8 hours because if those guys drive and it's 1 o'clock before they get done, there's nowhere else they can go but home. They can't, it's unlikely they're going to be able to start another job somewhere. So because the customer required us to be there for X amount of hours in a day, that really shot our whole entire day with those two men that we still have to pay. So that's the reason for the day quotes. However, another way around it is you can look at, well, he has 2 or 3 24-volt systems. Well, we can still do all those in one day. You're theoretically can add up to 120, how many jars it would have been, and do that. It doesn't exactly line up that way, but you can get close enough to that you're good. So it says based on 120. If you go to 240, because it's based on 120, I wouldn't add another day. You can talk to me or talk to Brad about it, but I would add more hours. So he may say, hey, you can make this a 12-hour day instead of a 10-hour day, and now we can do a 240-volt system because the rack is just one rack still. It's not multiple racks, multiple strings. So it's not double the time it takes just because we have double the amount of jars. So you may can add, he may tell you to make it a long day, which would be 14 hours. I've never gone above 16-hour days, and I don't know anyone that would want to work that many hours, but we've gone up to 16-hour days. So that by the time you add these two together, that's 16 hours that they would have to be there. Anything above that, they're going to tell you to split it into 2 days, even if the second day is only a half day worth of work. So you would make it a 2-day job. So I want to make sure that's kind of clear as clear as it can be in the gray area of what discretion we have to help win a quote as an apps engineer or as a proposal engineer doing these things. The way I describe this particular part, and it's much like your individual jobs that you guys already do, is the notepad, the flip pad that I write on, it's got a red line down the center. The left side of it is engineering, the right side of it is business. We have to be right in the center of that. We have to be an engineer. We have to make something that's safe and that works, but we also have to make business sense about what we're doing to make sure that we're making the right judgment call on being able to win it, but also winning it with a decent amount of profit that makes it worth our time to quote. So these are the ways that we do it as we're thinking is instead of 2 days, we make it a long day. So again, as you're learning the labor part of it, contact me or one of the guys on my team or Brad, but preferably myself or Brad first, and we can kind of help steer you a little bit. And it really, I think for you guys, it'll make a lot of sense already because you kind of understand exactly what we're doing in the first place. So that's how we do that. The rest of these will be the same. All you're looking at is a single cell jar and it's 215 pounds. Well, a single cell jar, there are going to be there'll be 60 of those things for a 120 volt system, and they weigh 215 pounds apiece. So it's going to be 2 men, 2 days. And that's by the way, this description means to R&R, remove and replace. So we'll remove the system and replace it with 2 men, 2 days. If it's a single cell jar, and it says less than 215, but it really means until you get to 90 pounds. So under 90 pounds, it's just 1 day. Same with the rest of these. Single cell jar that's really heavy. First of all, OSHA standards, you have to have 2 men. But secondly, when you're doing the cell lift, if you guys are unfamiliar with it, you really want a guy on each side of it and the guy lifting it, and then somebody there to, I guess, tell everybody to stop or move forward whichever way. But you really need someone on each side of that jar to make sure it doesn't start to slip off. So that's the reason for having multiple men, even though they're using a cell lifter or some form of a machinery to lift these things and get them in there. OPZSs are different. Their height, you guys are aware of the difference in height, OPZS, STT, whichever you want to call it. The height difference is what makes the difference in some of these, like a 300 versus a 2000. There's a cutoff here where your height starts to change. And because of the topple effect or the change in center of gravity on it, it may require more men to be there to make sure that it doesn't fall over. If it's inside of a cabinet, This one, I don't know why they're separating it out, but if it's inside of a, I guess because it's 350 here, 350 must be, Daniel, if you know for sure, or one of you guys, at 350, I think it's somewhere along there where the height changes. But that's going inside of a cabinet makes it more difficult to do. So there's going to be a different requirement potentially, 3 men 3 days instead of 2 men 2 days for a lot of these that are in here. So that's the reason for the differences there. It's a detailed tool, just not as obvious as the other one I'm going to go through. And as you read through this, I'm not going to read through all of them. You have your NiCad systems here. You have your HX, which is a 12 volt blocks. So any of your 12 volt blocks, HX or our SBS UPS model line batteries or our gel batteries, any of that stuff, you can use this column for HX. Our modular batteries, you can use the same for, I would leave EnerSys, these are EnerSys numbers. If you're not familiar, I would leave those alone. The GMB ones are the ones that you can replace with if you have an EAGM or an AGM. Because if I'm correct in this, Daniel, if I'm wrong, let me know. I believe the GMB is more like the SBS product than these are, the way they're. For GMB, what they have here, you can use with Deca East Penn type jars. The name of those slipped me. I'll come back to it in a minute, but whatever they call their modular jars. And then the SBS modular batteries, the EAGMs and the AGMs. So if you have, and you may not be familiar to look at this, but you have 13, I can't remember exactly either, but let's say this is a 300 amp hour battery, then you find the matching 300 amp hour or AGM 300, then you'll use this column and say, well, that's 3 men 1 day to get the job done. So that's how this tool works. Rebuilding battery connections. You guys may get some of those during service reports when they go out and do PMs on batteries. A lot of times, and very often, they find corrosion on the intercell connectors, or they'll find something that needs to be replaced. So we still have to send someone out to do these. So some of these reports are, hey, we needed a few of them done. The customer wants the entire string done. So you have 120 volts worth of, however many jars you have worth of intercell connectors that have to be disassembled, cleaned, and then put together and torqued to spec. So it's a tedious process that takes a long time. So they're calling for 2 men 1 day. But also be careful on that, because I think that ECs and there's another model, they'll have the 2 ICs per jar. So you have your connections on both sides. So it's more to have to take apart and clean. So we just need to make sure we understand what we're doing. We may need to add another hour or 2 to the job if it's something with a double IC connection. And then of course the 240 volts, you got to add another day. So if it's anything more than 120, it's just more to have to take apart. And clearly, if you have all 12 volt batteries for this, 2 men 1 day is going to be plenty enough. And if you had to, you could back it down to 8 hours. It doesn't specify here. Oh, here was my things while ago for EAGM and GM. I didn't notice that. So yes, use that for EAGMs and GMs. That shouldn't be there, I don't think. But anyway, on this, if you have a 12 volt, clearly you're going to have less jars. And so there's less work to do. And especially if it's a 48 volt system versus a 120 volt system, then you really only need 1 man for 1 day to do that. Even if they might send 2 men out there, we're going to charge 1 man 1 day for it, because it's not nearly the amount of work. That again is the gray area, and it's something that until you get comfortable with, you can ask me or ask Brad how they want to do that. Brad, if you don't know Brad well, he's I think 20 years of doing installations, and they kept him on when he was done lifting heavy batteries. Kept him on to take this role on that he's doing now. It's a good help for us. Charger install. On this, it'll tell you 2 men 1 day, but there it is, up to 25 amps. So it's going to be single phase up to 25 amps. 2 men 1 day. If you get into a 3-phase jar, I'll show you on the other page, it's easier to figure out. You'll need a UPS and a helper. If you recall earlier, I talked about the helper. Helper is always one of the industrial guys out there or girls out there. So if it's single phase, 25 amps or less, it's a smaller unit. They'll do, if the customer's doing the conduit and the cabling, meaning if it's a complete rework of things, the customer has to do it. If not, if we're going to do it, we need to really get Brad involved and have pictures of what's there so that Brad can look at it and make sure that we understand what we're getting into. We have to be careful too with if you're replacing like a Lamarche charger with a Hendel or a Sens or something else. If your connections come in from the top, terminations come in from the top, and your new unit come in from the bottom, you may have a cable that's 3 feet too short. And you guys know well enough, you can't stretch a 2-aught cable or a 4-aught cable. So if it's too short, it's too short. So what this says isn't exactly what it means. If they're just adding a 3-foot piece to make, to tie it together to make it long enough, that's minimal work. That's minimal conduit, it's minimal work. We do put in a miscellaneous cost if we know they're going to do that. I'll show you on the quote tool where you can do that if you come across it. We'll add miscellaneous items of, believe it or not, because I'm doing an addition on my house right now. The wire is extremely expensive. 6-gauge wire right now for 100 feet of it was, I think, $275. So when you're looking at, we're adding 10 feet, I mean, you're spending $75 worth of stuff right there. So with our miscellaneous cost, we'll throw in at least 100 or 150 bucks on most everything. A lot of times we throw in 200 bucks because we have to buy the conduit to go there as well. But when we come across those, if you see that we're having to do a little bit of conduit work, I don't want to go through the pain of going out to Annixter, getting a quote, all this, that's silliness. We have these cables on our truck. We know roughly what they cost. We give it a good markup, we're good. We're not trying to necessarily make money off the cables. We just don't want to lose money on it. So you can use your own intuition for that. The Echolink things, they're calling for 1 man 1 day. Jim, you should be extremely familiar with this. So really, before calling Brad, I would call Jim if Jim, if you don't mind handling those calls from the guys. But the 120 systems, if we're installing the battery too, just another day. Because when we're installing the battery too, that means the tab washers are going to go on at the same time we're already doing other work. It's different if we have to go in and do the Echolink system by itself. I still think it's going to be 1 man 1 day, but the difference being we have to take something apart before we can put it back together to get the tab washers on. One of the things that I've been trying to push for sales reps to do is whatever they want to do, but to me, I would give away the 5 cents a piece tabs because that gives me a tool to sell an Echolink system to down the road. Hey, you already have the tabs on there. We don't have to charge you for going out and taking it apart and putting them on. We gave you the tabs. Now I can talk you into buying this Echolink system whenever down the road, and we're already set up and ready to go. So I think all of you guys are well aware of that now that I think about it. But these are and I'm additional man needed for however many man, and that's just there, I guess, for I don't know why. But additional man, this kind of goes hand in hand with what I'm talking about, the helper. So again, once you learn one tab, you basically learn the rest of them. They do have levels on a UPS tech. The level corresponds with, when I go to my UPS tab, the level corresponds with the level of technician that you're choosing here. P, even though they call them a UPS person, this is old nomenclature from the early 2000s, I suppose, from Nolan Power. P for a PM, for preventative maintenance person. So P1, so level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, and zone 0. So if I were to go off of what this first one's telling me, if I have a battery or a charger and I'm doing a quarterly PM, I can do 4 of them a day, as long as they're 120 or less. So if I have an RFQ that comes in and the RFQ requests quarterlies, and they give me 4 different chargers, and they give me 4 different batteries. The batteries, the unit name of the batteries should match the unit name of the charger on the site survey, which I haven't gone over yet with you guys. But once we get there, it should be clear with which battery. So therefore you have a system, you have a battery / charger system, and you're doing a quarterly PM. You can do 4 of them a day at 10 hours with one guy. So this one's telling you use a level 1, which is the P1. It automatically populates the 1 man, 1 day, 10 hours for you, but it's assuming zone 0. This doesn't have mobilization because your customer could be in Alabama or it could be in New York. Well, if it's in New York, it's not going to be a zone 0. That's when we have to do the mobilization as we spoke about earlier today. And if it is New York, that's when we do airfare and the different things that I'll go over with you when it's, if you guys have one of those. So that is exactly how this correlates with our quote tool. If you were to go through and read all these, I'll read a couple of them to make sure that they make sense to you. So semi-annual, they can do 3 a day instead of 4. There's a little bit more involved in the semi-annual. They're checking more cells in the specific gravity. So they're checking a few more things on a semi. And then you get up here, battery charger quarter today. So NiCad, that's the difference here. So it's not, you have to kind of read through to figure out what the differences are. If it's a NiCad system, you can do up to 5 a day instead of 4 a day. So you can kind of read through those. It starts to change right here when you get to, oh, by the way, these are the annuals. So you have just the quarterly, you have a semi or annual. It's still going to take 1 man, 10 hours. So I guess they just split out just so you can kind of have the different scenarios, but they're almost all the same now that I'm looking at it. Your UPS, the reason we have levels is you move from commercial to industrial on the UPS systems, and you move to a different voltage, you move to a different phase, you move to more, I'll call it more advanced things. I don't mean derogatory toward anyone, but I'll call it a little bit more advanced things. So you have a different level of technician that's trained to go out there and work on the bigger units, the higher KVA units. So these are broken down into KVAs. So a KVA, they can do 2 systems at 10 or less, 2 UPS systems with a level 2 person with 1 man, 1 day, and 10 hours. So again, just to quickly show you that, if you correlate that here, instead of a P1, I'm picking a P2 guy. It's still 1 man, 1 day, 10 hours. There's a different cost associated with it that's hidden in other things. There's a different cost associated with this person, and therefore maybe there isn't on the first 2. I think the number 3 is where it changes. There's a difference in cost in our revenue that we're seeing. But you're looking at 10 kVA or less. Now this, can you guys still hear me?
You're cutting out, Jamie.
Okay, are you missing anything or still good? Was there anything that you guys missed, or were you able to catch it?
We weren't able to hear anything that you just said, maybe last 30 seconds, a minute.
Okay, so I'll go back over the different levels of UPS technicians are, and we use the different levels depending upon the size of the UPS unit. So UPS units, you have, for the sake of this recording and the reason I'm going to use it in the future for people who have are coming off fresh with no experience, I'm going to explain it as if no one knows what a UPS system is basically here. So for the sake of the training video, UPS, you're going to have an inverter, a rectifier, and a battery. And that's what it makes up a UPS system. So when this is talking about a UPS 2 systems per day, or however many systems it tells you throughout these charts, you're looking at a UPS system that includes the battery. So the way I look at this, and the way it was explained to me way back when that made a lot of sense, is think of a box. So a UPS is a box and a battery is a box. It's just a big black box sitting there. You can do 2 systems a day. So the battery is a block and the UPS is a block. So that together is 1 system, and it's 2 blocks. So you can do 4 blocks a day is the way that I think it makes a lot more sense to a lot of people I train. You can do 2 UPS systems, but that includes the 2 batteries that goes with it. That's 4 boxes per day. Now, they don't give you any stipulations of how many batteries there are there, or any of the other things like they do on some of this other. So, but it is based, I thought it would say it in here somewhere, it's still based on a 120 volt system. So if you have a 480 volt system, probably a good idea to call Andrew Bernal, because he's the guy to call for UPS things. Say, hey, this is a 480. We still good with 10 hours, or do you need me to put 12 on it? He can answer you in 30 seconds or less, and you're good to go. It's that quick to make sure we put the right thing. After you do that a time or two, you'll know I can just add 2 hours to this. And you apply that same thought process to multiple scenarios. And that almost in and of itself is what makes a person more efficient and faster over time in engineering, is being able to apply what you learn here on the many different scenarios you'll see. So just kind of make sure you understand why the answer when you're seeking help from those guys, and it'll help you on future ones to where you can answer it yourself. But so for a less than 10 kVA, you're looking at a level 2 person, and it's 10 hours. And I think you guys missed it a while ago, but I'll show you real quickly again. It's the same thing. You have a P2 guy I'm choosing. And there isn't a difference in P1 and P2 in our revenue to the customer, but there will be, I believe at P3, it starts to change. And then 4 and 5 are different as well. Those are the more advanced systems. So this is with internal batteries only. And so you, on a UPS system, you may have internal batteries only, or you may have an external cabinet. So if it's just, this one assumes that it's a battery and a UPS, so it's 4 boxes per day. But this one assumes that there are only 2 boxes there. So if there are only 2 boxes there, you can get 4 done in a day. So again, if you think about the box scenario, if I can do 4 in a day, if I can do 4 total boxes in a day, I'm still doing 4 total boxes here because there's no external battery. It's just 4 UPSs with an internal battery. And that's why I think a lot of people understand the box scenario better than this. But whichever way makes the most sense to you, you can do more per day because there's less batteries to deal with. So these are a little bit more tough to kind of read through and figure out as you go through, and I won't spend the time on reading through the rest of those. When you get over to HX modules, we can do, let's see, this is 40 or less jars that are 61 pounds or less. But that doesn't make sense why 61 pounds or less, because this is not an install tab. I think that must have been a copy and paste when Service created this. But your HX jars, you think about those, you know they're a 12 volt block, and just like our UPS line for SBS. So you can get more of those done. I really think this whole thing is an install. I think this is on the wrong tab. I don't think this is supposed to be on this tab at all. Equilink. Yep, this is talking about installation stuff again. So I think all 3 of these were inadvertently copied over to that tab. So I'll skip on down. You have annual and semi-annual and quarterly PMs, whether it's for batteries or chargers or UPSs. On a UPS, most of the time, you're going to have an annual. Sometimes you have a 5-year, and then you have a 10-year. So that's common sense which one you do in which order there. But when you get to a 10-year PM, you can do 2 per day. That's 2 systems per day. So that's 4 total boxes. That's a UPS and an external cabinet, and a UPS and an external cabinet. Actually, that would be, yeah, that would include the batteries too. On a 10-year PM, you're using a different level person for each of these. This is for an AT. This is a charger. This is for AT or SCR style. So with a charger system, doing a 10-year PM, you're still going to be able to use a level 2 person, and they will be able to go in and knock those out for 10-year. The passive components generally is what are replaced. So anything that's passing and not giving any thought process. So a capacitor is a passive unit, a fuse passive unit, doesn't do anything but pass information along, information being electrons and neutrons, passing them right along. So a passive, anything that could go out over time. So shelf life of a capacitor is 10 years in the first place, I believe. So at the 10-year mark, we're going to change them whether they need it or not, just to make sure that we have a fresh one in there. So, but fans are also included because they have, I guess some of them may have bearings in it, but they're, at any rate, there's a movement, there's a mechanism that moves in there, and there are windings in there, and those things over time get bad, so they're going to replace the fans too. So you have 10-year PM. That won't only be labor. It'll look like it's labor only when it comes in as an RFQ, and I'll help you guys step through that. It'll say 10-year PM on so-and-so charger. Well, what that also means is I have to get the parts for that and quote those as well. And so that becomes more arduous to do because there's really no such thing as a 10-year PM. It's kind of a made up thing per manufacturer. Some of them will say replace all 10 caps of this. Some will say replace just 8 of them because the other 2 are too hard to get to. 10-year kit doesn't really have a defined set of things that we do. It's just the general idea of passive components that we need to change. We do still see some 30-year-old chargers out there and 20-plus-year-old UPSs out there. So you still will see incandescent light bulbs that we'll have to replace. But those are getting less and less as time goes. They're the LED types now. So there'll be less of those, but you have to know what you're looking at. Make sure that we understand it. So the 10-year PMs are not difficult, except for we as a company do not have the schematics for those. And the older the unit is, the less likely they're going to have the knowledge, even at the manufacturer of those. If you were in any form of engineering or drafting before, you remember the big plotters that they have, and they pull these big, long, skinny drawers out that have each of the schematics in it. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're going through old schematics, looking for whatever model number, serial number that you provide to them and find out what caps they need. And that's every manufacturer, it's not just one of them. So it's a little difficult once you get above 15 or 20 years to define exactly what you need, but it's part of what we do for our customers. But just expect a level of difficulty there for that reason. So they've broken them out here into Gutor and Benny. So what you've done is basically he's given us an example of, hey, you're moving more toward an industrial unit. So 10-year PM, you can do 1 per day instead of 2 per day. So this is a bigger, actually this is a charger still, see that now, but there's a different level of difficulty in doing these PMs than there are for our AT, which is a handle, or other SCR types. So, and I'm going to go through these because they're a little more difficult. The 5 to 10 year for a commercial UPS, you're going to use a level 3 person. If it's 18 kVA down to 10 kVA, wherever the 10 one was a while ago that I was pointing at. And then this is the same, except you're looking at not front or left access. So this one's more difficult because you have to take apart more of the unit to be able to get into it. So it takes longer to do it. So they're going to have 2 men to be able to do that. I'm going to go on pause for 1 second, guys. Bill, I don't know if you can pause for a second. I'm going to need about 45 seconds to 60 seconds. So I don't know if you can pause or not, but I'll be right back. If not, so going into this last bit of this, you have the 18 kVA, still using a level 3 guy. And this is where my confusion is I don't see where we're using on this sheet that they've given us the level 4 or 5. The other sheet that I'll go over is well, we don't have a 5, but the level 4 technician. The other sheet that I'm going to go over, it does go to the level 4 technician, and you'll see why, because this one looks like it stops at 18 kVA, and it doesn't give us the full run because we go up to way higher than 18 kVA. Testing, more of the same. It's probably the easiest tab. If it's a substation or switch gear, we can do up to 125 volt system, 300 amp hours or less. We can do 1 test 1 day. Up to switch gear. I don't see, 2 tests per day. It's difficult to see a little bit of these things. The difference here is it's 2 tests per day, but you see they added 4 hours to it. So you can see the math doesn't, just because we're doing one doesn't mean it's going to take 20 hours to do two. We're just adding a longer day to it. This plays into what I was speaking about earlier. The telecom and data centers, those are just different beasts. And the apps engineering team is still learning about that. It's just different. The acquisition of QSS rather, we're getting back into data center and telecom that we used to do as NPG 15 plus years ago. So we really only have one guy on our team that's familiar with doing the telecom and UPS stuff. However, the service manager, Brad or Andrew wouldn't be able to help you on this. The service manager for the area is who I would call for that. You can call me first. I probably do know the answer at this point, but if not, then we'll call either Will Reineke if it's in his area, or Matt O'Connell if it's in his area, and they'll be able to tell you, hey, I have a 240 volt system instead of a 48, or have whatever. And it's unlikely, because if it's telecom, you're probably going to have 48 or less always, but it's not broken up into data center. And we usually couple telecom and data center together when we're looking at doing our cap test. So a turbine is different. You're getting into a higher amp hour for one, but turbines are different. It requires a different, not technique, but a different time frame to be able to make sure the turbine is either backed up or is spun all the way down and stopped correctly, whichever is the case, before we do that test. So they're going to be able to do less of those per day. In most cases, you use steam turbine. These, you may not be able to discern what we're doing out there with the customer, because not every RFQ is going to tell you this is a combustion turbine, this is a this is a that. We ask those questions in the site survey, but they often do not get answered. So in lieu of chasing down answers all the time, you can either assume worst case scenario, or you can quote based on other information, kind of figure out as you're doing the quote. And when I say that, the more experience you get in doing this, the easier it is to figure those things out. But it would be inefficient to continue to chase answers from reps looking for more in the RFQ when we should have all the information there to begin with. But if not, we do what we do to keep rolling through. And I'll spare you reading through the rest of these. But a UPS up to 500 volts, 600 amps. The higher amp hours we go, it says amps, but the amp hours, the higher amp hours we go, the more I would question it as an individual doing the quote. When you get above a certain amp hour, I believe for us it's 600. I'm sorry for us. The traditional NPG load bank would be good, and test machinery would be good up to 600 amps, I believe it is. But the SBS one, I think, they were only confident up to 450 amp hours. So when you start to get above 600, I would question myself, if it were me, to make sure that this makes sense to me, what we're doing. And if you don't have knowledge about the specific test setup that you have, we'll get in touch with one of the service managers, or Andrew, I'm not Andrew for testing, but one of the service managers, to make sure that we're not getting high enough that we have to have that second unit. And as you can see here, at 1200 amp hours, they do require a second truck for more capacity. But I think that number in a number of cases in the past has been around 650 to 700 amp hours. So we just need to make sure, if you get one that large, and it's not extremely often we do, but when we do, we need to make sure that we have not necessarily the hours correct, because that's not going to be the difference. It's going to be, do we have the right load banks available? Do I need to charge for the second truck and therefore a second driver, which makes it a 2-man, 1-day job? Because this, I don't believe this would be correct coming from service, what they have. If the second truck is required, then there's clearly going to be 2 men instead of 1. So I believe that may be an error. So without continuing to go through this, I'm going to jump over to the PDF version, and you will see this is, that's not my handwriting, but most of this stuff in all caps is the way I write. So you can see that this is my handwriting from way back when I started and was trying to do the same thing I'm asking you guys, trying to apply the same thing I learned in different scenarios. So I took notes throughout this page, and that's what those are. These are the dollar amounts that I was speaking of earlier. They are no longer valid. This, I think, was a 2015 booklet. But as we start to go through this, you'll see that it almost 100% matches up to the spreadsheet. So a cap test, less than 125 volts and less than 700 amp hours. And that was correct. 700 amp hours are cut off. You do one test per day. If it's less than or equal to 700, we can do two tests per day. And what it doesn't show you here is it added that extra 4 hours that we talked about. Same thing here. NERC report is sold per report. So if you do a separate string, it's a separate report, it's a separate NERC. So on that quote tool that I spoke of earlier, when you're doing a NERC report, if you have two strings, you put the number 2 there, and it tells you how many hours extra it adds onto it. So it should be extremely clear from the sales rep that, hey, there's a NERC requirement. If you see the acronym NERC in there, know that more time than usual has to happen. If you forget where to click, at least you know, hey, there's something here I need to go ask somebody to make sure I get this right. And again, it's per report. So with each write-up of the battery cap test, and many different strings they do, there's a separate report, so therefore a separate NERC. Above 7.5 hours, they can do 2 tests per day. That'll be a 16-hour day, just because I've done it. If you go look at the sheet, it'll be a 16-hour day instead of a 14-hour day. And then a 240 volt or higher, they can do 1 test per day, but that's without including the temp battery, because to put a temp battery in would force them via OSHA standards to have to go to a second day. So if they do require a temp battery on this large of a string, then we're probably going to have to quote the second day, regardless if you can't stop a cap test, but they're going to push them so far into the day that we're going to have to charge. It'll basically be pulling a double. So again, some of my notes that I had taken at the time going to mobilization, I'll just explain it real quickly. The mobilization, if it's a zone 1, it's a half day or less drive. So half day to get there, half day to get back. If it's a zone 2, it takes more than a half a day, whether it's 6 hours or whether it's 8 hours. It takes more than a half a day to get there. It's going to take more than a half to get back. So that pushes you to more than a full day. So we charge more than a full day we charge a full 8 hours here. We only charge 4 extra hours on zone 1. Nothing to do with what we're talking about here, just explaining some of my notes. This is so industrial or install, however you want to say it. Again, one of my notes is to clean and neutralize. You'll see that in some of the reports that come through, and eventually one of these will land on us. We see them pretty regular. And this is cleaning and neutralizing the intercell connectors. So if the report says it and the sales rep wants it, we'll quote 2 men 1 day based on a 120 volt system, 2 men 1 day, because that's not in this paper here. And it's also not in that other tool. So I wrote down things on the sides for that reason. For installation, we can R&R, they call it dispose, but remove and replace, and we're disposing of the old one. So remove, replace it. We dispose the old one, we install a new battery on the existing rack. Remember, we have the rack adders. So if we're doing it on the existing rack, under the industrial tab, you don't have to do replace rack. So on the existing rack, standard temporary battery, our standard temporary battery is 110 amp hours, 120 volts. You can call it 125, or whatever you want to call it. 120 volt setup with 110 amp hours is our standard backup. So a question might be, well, I have a 200 amp hour battery. What's a 110 amp hour going to do? Well, all we're doing is trying to buy time. If something goes sideways, for the technician to be able to reconnect the string, the original string, back up. So 110 amp hours should be ample time. It doesn't necessarily have to back up the system for the time that they want it to. It's just got to back it up long enough for the technician to jump a battery or do whatever they have to do to get the system back up if something goes sideways during their test. But this also includes a certified installation report on existing rack. All these be the same. So on existing rack. So again, that should help remind you. That's why I like this one better. It should help remind you that if it's not on the existing rack, hit the button. If you're replacing the spill, again, I would do those separate. from each other, not the same, because if you do one, you basically have the other. But if you're going to add the spill itself, you know, and not replacing the rack or the spill containment, just hit add spill. What is this? One charger. If we're doing a single charger, single phase charger is the one stands for. I guess only I would know that, but single phase charger installation, 2 men 1 day of just the industrial crew. We don't have to have a UPS technician, just the industrial crew. That's one phase, single phase. But if it's 3 phase, we have to have a UPS technician and a helper. Helper, again, being one industrial person. One thing that can confuse you on the helper, let's assume these are blanked out, all of these things. So this is a brand new quote. I need to choose my installation. So I'm getting actually all installations are going to be a P4, I believe, Daniel. The P4 guy for installation. But if you will notice, he's 10-hour day. If you go try to do your helper over here, that one's, I've already stepped on my formula. But if you go do your helper here, it's 10 hours plus the 2-hour certification. Well, we don't want to do that. We need to match 10 hours for 10 hours, and it's 1 man, not 2. What I would type up here is helper. That lets anybody who did not propose this quote go in and help you in your absence if there's something that we need to figure out. Okay, when Bill was making this quote, he meant for this person to be the helper. This is the lead tech. And you don't have to put lead in there, but this is the lead tech out there to do this 3-phase install. And the helper is the one industrial. Now my hours match up. Another thing to look at too, I wouldn't fool with this unless your sales rep says, hey, we have to be ultra competitive. They're going to ride in the same truck. If we have to be ultra competitive, instead of taking a sales discount, the first thing I would do is say, well, I'm going to zero that out because they're going to ride in the same truck together as long as there's one of them. Now you're talking $150 or so that you're saving, but if that's what it takes to win it, take it off the mileage. Don't take it off, don't penalize the sales rep or the technician that $150 of their pay because of that. So just little things like that we have to look at as we're going through quoting. And again, part of the gray area where you have an awful lot of leeway in apps engineering to make sure that we help the sales rep win the job. No reason to keep going through these. These are all basically the same. It's just telling you the different levels in the title of what we can do and what it includes.
Hey,
this
David,
one to me, go ahead.
You may have mentioned it, but when you were talking about the spill containment adder, one thing I would note is that's only for EnviroGuard spill containment. If it's just a regular pan that you're just going to slide underneath the rack, we don't need to use the adder for that because there's nothing to build. It's already assembled.
Yeah, Daniel's correct, and I didn't mention that. If you were unaware, and for the sake of the recording, I'm going to assume everyone is, the SBS that we have is the easiest to assemble, and I don't believe it's UL listed, but it's UL compliant, if I recall correctly. The EnviroGuard that we use is UL listed, but is more difficult to assemble, which is why we have the adders in there for that. We also have the ability to quote and provide fiberglass spill containments, which is a giant pan, the size slightly larger than the rack size, and or stainless steel. So we can quote those. They're cheaper for us. You can mark those up with GM as you're quoting if you want to get it closer to an EnviroGuard, but still less and enough to make a difference. But we can quote those, and like Daniel said, there's nothing to build. You put in maybe 6 screws into the ground to hold it down to secure it, and you're good. You're good to go. So there's very minimal work there, and we do not add the extra 4 hours because of that. So Daniel's correct, and thank you for bringing that up. And with that, these are some of the reasons I was asked earlier, for a step-by-step guide. It would be awesome, and I really wish I could do that. There's so many small things like that would have to go in there. But I will look at least getting the main points, the main steps, I guess, to get quotes going and get things going. So I'll look into doing that. But there's so many things, which is why it takes such a long time before, at least within apps engineering, before we really cut someone loose that's new to the team and let them go, because there's so many things that you have to teach as you come up to it, because there's no way someone can remember it all during their first couple of weeks to learn the stuff. But getting back to this, this to me, I mean, it's the same information as what you saw over there. It lines up better to me and it's easier to read. So if we're doing a battery quarterly, you can do 2 of them at 480, 3 at 240, 4 at 125, or 5 at 48. It's pretty simple to understand. This is just the battery. If you're doing just the battery for an annual, you do roughly half of those. Well, I guess not half, but you do one less at least of those in each of the same scenario. And the reason being is you're on an annual, you're testing every cell instead of just every whatever amount of cells that they have. I think you just test 1 cell per jar on a quarterly, but you have to test them all on annual. So you have more readings that you have to do, and it takes longer to record them all. Now this is just the charger. So this is just the battery, just the battery. With the charger, we're only doing annuals on those. So we're looking at 4 per day at 240, 4 per day, 4 per day, doesn't matter. And I don't know that we've ever done a 480 charger, but I guess you're looking at 4 for each of these. System, think about boxes. You have 2 boxes in a charger system. You have the charger and you have the battery that it's charging. So you can do 1 system, which is 2 boxes. You do 2 systems, which is 4 boxes. You do 3 systems, which is 6 boxes. So the reason I bring that back up is if you have one that says, well, I have 6 of these that are 48 volts, 1 that's 240, and 2 that's 125. It's easier for you to think about them in boxes, and I won't go through that scenario now in depth, but if you think about them in boxes, it's easier when you come to those, I guess, more difficult ones where it's not just cut and dry. I go look at the sheet and I'm good to go, because most of them are going to have an array of different battery string sizes here. They're going to have different different charger outputs. I mean, there's going to be a plethora of things that are all mixed in together. So it becomes more difficult when you have a full I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but a whole site, the whole plant. And so instead of just 1 string, your technician's going to be there for 4 or 5 days, because you got a whole entire plant worth of these things to do, because a lot of customers in the month of October do their shutdowns, at least in the South with the oil industries that we have down here. They'll shut the plant down for a period of 2 weeks, October, November timeframe. And that's when the boards get crashed. Every technician's busy doing something because they want all this done when they're in an outage. They don't have to worry about temps. They don't have to worry about things going down. So you'll get an entire plant worth of these things, and you may have up to 40 different strings. So the other thing about that 40 different strings I'll touch very lightly on is you wouldn't just say, well, 40 divided by 3 48-volt strings and we're good. Let's say that we have 10 days worth of it. Recall that we have 10 days, but we also have those two extra hours that are added into each day. The more days you have, the less sense that 2-hour adder makes. You'll end up with a 2-week quote where it should be a 5-day quote if you keep adding more and more hours to it. If you go what we call standard labor, which is I don't change anything, I click what the button says and I move on. So it becomes very unstandard once you get past the 2nd day or so on any labor item. You have to start backing down your hours manually, or you'll end up putting us out of competition with anyone out there. And if that doesn't make sense, as those come up, I will catch them when I assign them out and make sure that we go over that and understand it. But that is a common mistake that a lot of new people will make, that we always catch before they go out, is, hey, you got 10 days here. It really should be 5. And you did it correctly. It's just You have to think about it a different way. And that's that red line I talked about earlier. Left side's engineer, right side's business. Before that quote goes out, we got to think about the business aspect. Does this make sense? UPS install for correspondence KVA value plus industrial helper. Just another note I had, don't forget, if we're doing a UPS install, I have to have a helper. So if it's a 10 kVA or less install, I'll pick a level 2 UPS technician, and my level 1, or there is no level, but the first 1 man, 1 day, match the hours, 10 hours each, for that industrial helper. So these make sense. They can do up to 2 UPS units, so up to 4 boxes. This is for install. This is just for doing annuals. So don't let my note confuse you, because it didn't say anything about installs here. I took a note separately from that. So if it's an install, you use the corresponding KVA value person. 10 kVA here, between 10 and 60, use a P3, and then your industrial helper. This page, though, is referencing PMs. So as you're looking at PMs, it includes a PM on the UPS battery in the cabinet up to 2 UPS units. And then you change it here from 10 to 60. You use P3. Here's a note. Yep, it's a note I wrote way back when. 4 boxes per day, up to 2 UPS units. Includes a PM on the battery and in the UPS cabinet or on a rack. Anytime we're replacing components, have to use the top level person. They're going to send out a level 4. Well, we call it level 4. I think they now have even different levels than that, but the service people know what level person to send out when we put a level 4. But when we're replacing components, we got to use the industrial technician. The rest of these say commercial. The highest level is the industrial technician. For a 10-year PM, again, this is stuff I've already said, just a part of my notes, 2 chargers per day for a 10-year PM or 1 UPS per day. Full function test loading, I'm not even going to go there on all this stuff. We've only done it twice this year so far in the first place. And this is heavily involves Mike O'Brien, and he's going to want to know plethora's amounts of details and things. So we would just basically turn that over to Mike O'Brien to tell us what to do. But I don't anticipate you guys getting those assignments, so I'm not going to worry about going over that. So with that, Bill, that's the end of, I think, the recording part of this. And then if you want separately to go over Q&A with the different